school year. I'm David Schanzer, and I'm going to do my best to fill the big shoes of Peter Fever while he's away on sabbatical this year. And extremely happy that you've tuned in on a Friday afternoon in almost August, late July, for this very timely conversation with Major General Ron Clark. Just before we begin, a couple quick announcements about AGS for the fall. We will have a welcome back kickoff function with a Zoom and also Glimpse event. This is going to be on Tuesday, August 18th at 5. You'll receive a lot of notices about that, but I just wanted to give you a heads up. And just want to let you know, unfortunately, our chat function is not working. We are going to have an open mic and question period. So if you do, during the event, if you want to ask a question, if you could contact, email Melanie Benson, she's online and she's on our event, at Melanie, MELANIE.Benson, BENSON, at duke.edu. Email her, let her know that you want to be recognized, and we'll make sure you get the connection. And if you need any more information about AGS events or want to sign up for the newsletter, visit our website, ags.duke.edu, and we will get you connected. Let me turn now to welcome our guest, Major General Ron Clark. He is currently the Chief of Staff of the Indo-Pacific Command of the United States Army. General Clark graduated from the Military Academy in 1988 and has had a distinguished career as an infantryman in the Army for 32 years with multiple combat tours. His full bio is available on the web, so I'm not going to read it now. But very importantly, he was one of our Duke Counterterrorism and Public Policy Fellows at the Sanford School in 2013-14. And very importantly, he's a proud Duke dad as well. And he's just one of the nicest, most decent people I really have ever come to know. And so I'm so happy that we could kick off our season having some time with you, General Clark.
Well, David, thanks for the warm introduction and really for the opportunity to join you in the program for American Grand Strategy. It's been an honor to be associated with Duke University, both as a counterterrorism public policy fellow and as a parent for the past few years. And really, it's just wonderful that you're putting this together. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome, and thanks for your time. And aloha from Hawaii, and nice and early in the morning there. Thank you for waking up so early to do this. Maybe it's probably not early for you, but it's early for us, so thanks.
Well, it's early to be dressed like this. That's all I'll say.
All right, let's dive right into it, Ron. The events of this summer have really brought issues of racial equity right to the forefront of our society. And every institution, Duke University, the Sanford School, the United States Army, is really being asked to to consider its history and also to conceptualize ways that we can address these issues of racial equity and historical racial discrimination. Now, you've been part of the Army for your entire life. You came from an Army family. You spent your career in the Army. I just want to start out by giving you a chance to kind of tell your story as a young man who was stationed in Fort Polk. Your parents were stationed in Fort Polk when you were in high school in the 80s. You were a cadet at the Military Academy, and now, of course, you've worked your way into the upper ranks of the Army leadership. Tell us a little bit about your story and how has the Army's handling of these issues relating to race during the past decades? How have you observed that, and how do you feel it's evolved over time? I know it's a broad question. We could take the whole time, but give us a bit of an overview of your life and your observations on this issue.
Sure. I'll just start, David, with, again, thanks for the opportunity. And, to the Sanford School and Dean Kelley, just want to say thanks. Part of my story is really based and grounded in being a member of an Army family. So my father joined the Army in 1964. During a time when, the Army was going through some inflection points, as well as the country. So Think about the 1960s. My parents graduated from high school in 1963. They went to a segregated all-black high school in rural South Louisiana, graduated again in 1963. So my father joined the Army a year later and went on to serve almost immediately in Vietnam. So during the Civil Rights Movement, during the war in Vietnam, that was the backdrop under which my father decided to volunteer to join the Army, also during the draft. So the question would be why? He knew that the Army was an organization that had fully integrated in the 1950s under an executive order signed by President Truman in 1948. He had two brothers that preceded him in the Army. So it was a great opportunity, one, not only for to improve his socioeconomic condition, but his family was exceptionally patriotic, and they believed in the ideals of this country, and that, again, from the Declaration of Independence, that, all men are created equal. So the best chance for equality and opportunity lie, in his mind, in military service as a gateway for him to be able to meet his full potential. Because remember, during that time, our nation was rife with Jim Crow laws, especially in the South. There were restaurants he couldn't eat in. There were, when he went to a store to buy clothing, he couldn't try those clothes on in a store, white-only drinking fountains and separate facilities. And again, my parents were a function of the segregated society they lived in. My grandfather actually drove the school bus that bused both my parents to a school that was 2 towns away from where they lived, based on the separate but equal facility. So again, my father joined the Army in that backdrop. I, again, born in 1966, so grew up in a family where my parents really taught us not to focus on race, but more on character. So it's on the character of the friends and relationships that they built that I pretty much grew up on as a kid, until moving to Louisiana, where my parents decided to retire from the military in 1980. So 8th grade, now I live in Leesville, Louisiana, in almost a civilian situation, because although there are military kids present, because Fort Polk, Louisiana is 8 miles from Leesville, and it's a pretty large military installation. So there are a lot of military kids in that environment. But you're basically living, in a town where people have done the things that they're doing for the entirety of their lives. So for me to be thrust into a pretty much rural southern town as a kid who has been taught that race is something that you deal with, there's a little bit different and a change. But my parents have prepared me for that. So the first example I'll give is when I was in 9th grade. I was asked by a couple of my classmates to run for student council as a homeroom representative for our 9th grade homeroom, and I was selected. The young lady that I ran against, Caucasian, good kid. I mean, we knew each other. We were friends, still friends. So after the class, the teacher asked me to stay behind so he could discuss with me a matter of importance. So I assumed that he was going to give me instructions on my duties and responsibilities as a homeroom representative. Instead, he told me, hey, you should give it to her. She's going to go to college. She'll need that for her admissions applications. You're not going to go to college. You should probably just allow her to do this, and I think it'll be okay. My response to him was, no, it's the will of the people that I represent them. Obviously, we haven't met. You and I will get to know each other over time, and I'm fairly certain that I'll be able to represent this class with the dignity that the office requires. So, again, had I not been raised in a family where my parents had prepared me for the eventuality of, overt racism, I think it may have been a moment that may have changed the trajectory of my life in a negative way. Also during that time, I grew up as a baseball player. So to play baseball in some of these rural towns in Vernon Parish, Louisiana, you get the cat calls, you get the, epithets thrown at you. I mean, the N-word being used on you by other athletes, by their parents as a 13 and 14-year-old, teaches you to kind of deal with situations. My parents, again, and all the parents of the kids from the teams at Fort Polk, because that's where we chose to play ball, because it was a, an ecumenical situation, if you will, around military kids. So we were the only teams that had players of color in that league. So we were prepared for that, and just comport yourself with the dignity of Jackie Robinson and continue to win was the key. Make them pay on the scoreboard. Don't let it bother you. Play through it. So those are some of the seminal experiences I had as a kid growing up in the South, where you wouldn't think you'd have to deal with those kinds of things, but again, you're prepared for that. The last story I'll tell about kind of growing up in that environment was, you often hear the term driving while black. With two of my friends from high school, we were just in, one of them had a late model Oldsmobile. We're just, in the car moving from one place to another, and we're pulled over in a traffic stop that was a case of mistaken identity. In the process of being arrested, and we were seniors in high school at the time, so I was already accepted to West Point, had a plan, was moving out. The other two gentlemen, the same, had plans and future aspirations that were much bigger than that little situation. Because all of our parents were in the military, we had a perspective on that situation that allowed us to, again, comport ourselves with calm, discipline, and not turn it into something that could have been, a bad situation. In that, you see some of the issues with regard to the way that law enforcement isn't necessarily blind when it comes to, how they perceive certain people during some sort of traffic stop or a law enforcement action. So because we were calm and allowed the situation to just play itself out without, claiming our civil rights being violated, resisting, what have you, we were able to kind of work ourselves through it, and they were able to figure out that we were not the three black youths that they were looking for. Interestingly, the other two gentlemen have gone on to be wildly successful in their professional lives. One is Don Remy, who's the executive, he's the chief operating officer of the NCAA. And the other is Demetrius Lloyd, who's an executive vice president of Sony BMG Records. So, Demetrius has Michael Jordan, Beyonce, and John Legend on speed dial. So, and I'm just the third guy in that group. So to think about the trajectory of our lives having changed in a way that's irreparable, had we been harmed, killed, what have you, just for driving down the street, it really kind of brings home some of the issues that we're seeing right now across our country with regard to people standing up for police brutality. So if you fast forward to the time at West Point, I don't recall any specific instances of overt racism when it came to me. However, there were a number of my classmates and one of my roommates who, suffered indignities that you wouldn't expect you'd see at the nation's military academy, being called a nigger, having, people say or do things that are untoward based on the color of your skin, specifically black females having a difficult time with some of their peers and our tactical officers who were responsible for the, training of and discipline of the Corps of Cadets, I think really did not and were not ready for some of the issues with regard to females in general and black females specifically, and treating them in a way that they felt like they were full members of the Corps of Cadets. So I'll just leave it at that. In my time in the military, I'm an infantry officer by trade. I've basically spent my time in the, in combat units, and in the study that I was fortunate enough to work with Dr. Kelley on, it's an underrepresented branch, even though it's overrepresented with regard to senior leadership. So two branches in the Army, infantry and armor, produce about a third of the general officers, and there are 17 branches. So infantry and armor are underrepresented in terms of African Americans, and that's something we can talk about later. So I've almost always been the only African American officer in the room. I'd even offer now in a joint command here in Hawaii, an Indo-Pacific Command, responsible for 60% of the Earth's surface and over 300,000 service members. Department of Defense civilians and contractors, I am the only person of color of the 11 generals and admirals in our headquarters. So for questions about that, again, I'm open to discuss.
Thank you for all sharing those stories with us. I know it's not easy, but it's so important to hear. You raised your study, and I know Dean Kelley is on the line, and your schedule might not remember being with us the whole time. So, Dean Kelley, if you wanted to make a comment or ask a question of Ron right now, we could do that, even though it's not our normal format. Are you ready?
I'm planning to stay with you for the whole time, so I don't need to. I don't need to barge in. Whatever you want.
Thank you for that. I'm glad you're able to be with us. That's fantastic. Ron, let me just highlight something. It's very interesting. I was talking to my daughter. I said, yeah, we're trying to do programming on racial equity issues. We're having a senior leader from the Army. And her reaction was, why are you bringing somebody from the government? I mean, to talk about this. I mean, it was a generational thing. And I was like, you have to understand, I mean, the Army was the first big institution in our country to desegregate. It's been a source of opportunity. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to that, this idea that your dad, just because he saw the Army as an area that would provide him more opportunity possibly than other places in society, that's not a denial, is it, of understanding that there is racism within the Army, or there's institutional biases and things of that nature. You can have both things, can't you? Can't you have the Army as being a source of opportunity, but also an imperfect institution? How do you think and speak about that?
Well, David, that's a great question, and I would just offer that you can have both. It's the Army is an organization that really has led our country through a number of, and the Department of Defense has led our country through a number of social issues over time. For instance, I talked about Executive Order 9981 that racially integrated the military well before the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I mean, it was 16 years prior to the execution of that. So if you think about the contemporary situations that we have with regard to race that we're dealing with right now, I think the Department of Defense sees its role as important and integral in helping our nation work its way through this. So for me to be involved in that, I think is hugely important. And I've participated in a number of forums like this to discuss my experience. So you talked about my father's experience. I would offer that he understood that the Army had systems and processes in place to deal with overt racism, whereas outside the military, the systems and laws themselves were organized in a way that continued to propagate overt racism. That the Jim Crow laws that he grew up living through his entire life to that point treated him less than equal. And in the Army or in the military, equal opportunity is a part of really the fabric of the institution itself. Now, again, it's made up of people, so there are going to be issues of how that's applied. And so there's going to be institutional racism that's associated with service. But again, it's a system that's relatively closed in that leaders can make decisions with legal authority that change fundamentally the way that we do things based on those leaders having an opportunity to have the responsibility and authority to do so. So an example of that is, on the heels of, the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, the Department of Defense at the top, the Secretary of Defense, immediately formed a committee on diversity and inclusion, and really opened the aperture at all levels in the Department of Defense for good ideas to help us get after some of the challenges that we see, not only in society, but also that permeate our ranks. Because what we ask young men and women to do that join the military is to assimilate to our culture and values. But what we're also asking them to do is to, in some cases, eschew the things that they've learned throughout their life that are taught to them either through, actual lessons or by example of the most important people in their lives, their parents, their peers, the media, not the news media, but media in general, that, this is how things are supposed to be. And if those things are against or anathema to Army values or Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, even Space Force values, then we have to help them understand that the things that they've learned and been taught their entire lives are not acceptable here. And because we have processes and programs in place to address racism, discrimination, sexual harassment, toxic work environment, and the authorities with which to hold people accountable who violate those rules, regulations, policies. Again, that the government, I know is a monolithic, thing in the minds of some young people, but I'd also offer that the government has rules and statutes in place that allow it to make change quickly. And I think in the case of a lot of social issues, lead our nation through some of those problems.
Well, we're gonna get back to the kind of reform movement and Secretary Esper's in a sec. I wanted to turn to questions about the academy, because if you're talking about, and your experience at the academy, if you're talking about how you start inculcating Army values, that's where it all begins, right? And of course, the peer institutions and the other services. So last month, 9 very distinguished recent grads of the academy wrote what I thought was a pretty searing letter to the superintendent, who is the first African-American superintendent in the history of the academy, that detailed some pretty harrowing examples of racism on campus. You were there in the 80s, you didn't observe as much of this, but all of them said things like racial epithets, harassment, failure to investigate claims of racism, what you just talked about, that there was accountability measures. They say that those weren't working. And they mentioned a campus that has buildings and monuments named after, that honor the Confederacy as well. To their credit, they provide a whole set of recommendations that they would like to see, so a reform agenda. And I bring this up because, of course, at Duke, our students are grappling with the same thing. And not as long as history as the Army and the Military Academy, but it's a history that their race is entwined into it. And so all of our students are grappling with this matter of how do we take what we have and try to change it. The letter, started an IG investigation that said that they would explore all matters of race at West Point. And you were, in your career, you were part of a Center on Professional Ethics at West Point. So I think, I'm sure you have this direct experience with, the campus culture and how you try to bring about reform. So I was wondering if you could reflect on the student experience and this question of reforming an institution where there have been elements, and these students are experiencing elements of overt racism and structural racism in the present moment. What should these institutions, how should they go about it? What should be our benchmark for saying, okay, that makes sense, and that's going to be successful. That's something that ought to be done.
Well, David, great question. I would start by saying I'm exceptionally proud of those young graduates who have produced a pretty searing indictment of really the academy in their own voice. Those graduates were all classes of 2018 and 19, Fulbright scholars, Rhodes scholars, cadets who are absolutely at the top of the leadership pyramid at the academy. So if you think about,
and they did
West
that
Point,
some risk, right?
Oh yeah, because they're in the Army, they're lieutenants, they're no longer cadets. So I mean, they're having to answer, I'm sure, questions to their peers and superiors. Why are you writing an open letter? What's that about? So again, it's a professional risk, which is part of our profession, to be able to speak truth to power. So that they chose to do that, I think is admirable. So I would also say that, again, these are exceptional graduates. So I know several of them. So the interesting thing about it is, in my experience as the director of the Simon Center for Professional Military Ethic, I was responsible for the character development of the Corps of Cadets. So to see leaders of character, exemplars at the academy and in the Army speak out on their truth, I think is important. Some of the ideals that they put forth, I think, are absolutely necessary in the business of trying, one, to listen and understand. Because much like the student population at Duke University, the student population at West Point represents the best of us. They're tremendous scholars, people of character. At West Point, you can put an athletic component in that, because every cadet and athlete and every athlete challenged. Because again, what we're trying to build at the academy are leaders of character for service in the Army and to the nation for a lifetime. So again, the people who wrote the letter, absolute top notch. The ideas that they put forward, I think, were bold, and they really will hold the academy to account. So I again, it's a small group, if you will, because we only, much like Duke, Duke has 6,000 undergrads. West Point has 4,400 a year. So it's not a relative sample of, it's not a large university. So the alumni group tends to be close knit and rather small. So as soon as the letter hit the street, there was a lot of buzz and discussion. My point to anybody who wanted to talk to me about it is, hey, the academy is always changing and evolving. Since 1802, it's really a story of change and evolution. So some of the things were identified in their letter, I am fairly certain, were a surprise to members of staff and faculty who are currently at West Point, and even to the superintendent, who's my former boss and friend. That some of the issues that were identified, of racial epithets, of online bullying, if you will, racism that's overt inside of the Corps of Cadets, I am fairly certain were an absolute shock to the administration. Because, like I said, you believe that cadets are the best of us. They come from all 50 states. They represent class presidents and valedictorians and captains of athletic teams, and they're the best kids you can find that are appointed by either the president, vice president, or members of Congress to be a part of that class that comes in at about 1,200 to 1,500 cadets on reception day. So to see those kinds of actions and behaviors from cadets perpetrated towards other cadets, or a lack of understanding of majority cadets of the experience of their minority peers, is rather telling. So again, I think it's an absolute shot across the bow, to use a Navy term, to the academy that there needs to be some change. So, for instance, part of the discussion about Confederate symbols, monuments, and facilities named after specifically Robert E. Lee at West Point had not been addressed for years. Reconciliation Plaza, which is addressed in the letter, it's a monument at West Point that tells the story of the reconciliation of the Union and the Confederacy post-Civil War. It doesn't mention slavery at all. Now, I've walked past Reconciliation Plaza, and it's only been around since the 2000s. I want to say 2001. But I walked past Reconciliation Plaza all the time. Never noticed that it didn't mention slavery. Lee Barracks, Robert E. Lee's graduate, he used to be on the poster that West Point used to tout, that the history we teach was made by the people we taught. That's the recruiting poster that they sent me when I was in high school. I'd lived in Leesville, Louisiana. It never bothered me once that, he was a traitor to our country, and is a general, according to Ty Sedgley, who's a historian emeritus at West Point, is the general who killed more Americans than any other general in the history of the world. So if you put it in that context, and you understand that that change is inevitable and necessary for us to be our best selves, the academy has to take a hard look at that. And then when you go back to the history of when it became named that and why it became named that, and you find out that the Daughters of the American Confederacy in a campaign to, again, push their own narrative, named those barracks and brought in or contributed to the naming of the barracks and really lobbied and pushed the academy to do some of those things in the 1920s. So it's not something that's been around since the end of the Civil War, but it's something that happened during a period well after that to, again, commemorate and celebrate some parts of the Confederacy that now we've identified are not necessarily the best way to go about things. So again, the superintendent's got a tough path to trod, and I wish him well. And some of the challenges that he has are really trying to identify the right people to help him do it. So the academy right now is struggling with, and has over time struggled with, having representative racial and ethnic representation that represents the Army that cadets will serve in on the staff and faculty at West Point. So the first thing they can look at in terms of change is identifying the right people. Not that the people that are there now are not good, but the right people to be on staff and faculty, to be the right role models for cadets going forward, to ensure that we're educating, training, and inspiring leaders of character for our Army and our nation going forward, that have a certain amount of empathy and understanding when it comes to race. So they're prepared to have those conversations with a very racially diverse organization that they're going to lead once they leave the academy.
Thank you so much for that. I'm sure those words are going to help our students and our faculty who are on the call and inspire us as we talk about our own institutional reforms as well. Let's turn to your role as a leader at this time. And just to quote from the statement that Secretary Esper made after the George Floyd killing in Minneapolis, he goes on and talks about the Army's history. He goes, however, we're not immune from the forces of bias and prejudice, whether visible or invisible, conscious or unconscious. We know this bias burdens many of our service members and has direct and indirect impact of the experiences of our minority members, the cultural and ethnic diversity of the force, representation in our officer ranks. These things have no place in our military. They have no place in our country. So you're a senior leader, and you've essentially been charged with trying to deal with this bias and burden that Secretary Esper says affects so many of the people who are under your command. So how are you, as a leader of an organization, how are you grappling with this moment? And I'm sure you've done it throughout your career as well. So what are the types of things that you have done to try to both reduce the prevalence of that bias and burden being imposed upon those individuals who are under your supervision, and also to try to mitigate the impacts of the bias and burden on those people who are the targets of the discrimination?
David, great question. The first thing I'd offer in this is my responsibility as a leader is to lead from the front and by example, and to really try to set the example every day through word and deed for others to follow. So I mentioned during the question previous about listening. So one of the things that we've done in our headquarters as a chief of staff is I've participated with our commander, who's a 4-star admiral, and our deputy commander, who's a 3-star Air Force general, and the commander's mobilization assistant, who's a 2-star National Guard, Army National Guard general, is to listen. So we have set aside time in our schedules over the past really 2 months to just go to a neutral location inside of our headquarters and sit, so that people who work in our organization, in our headquarters, and that's uniformed military and Department of Defense civilians, can just come and tell you their story, or to share with you some of the pain that they're experiencing based on some of the civil unrest, based on some of the challenges of the pandemic, and some of the issues that are just inherent in any workplace. So first, it's just the opportunity to listen, and then to take action when people bring issues to the fore that are something that can affect your organization in a positive way. For instance, we had a situation where we had some workplace toxicity. So, to have someone come in and have the courage and trust in you as a leader to come in and say, hey, look, there's a problem that I think you need to address. And here it is, and to lay it out in a way that is, obviously painful for them to have to go through, but then to share with you that pain so that you, again, have the authority to go forward and look into it a little more deeply. Because again, it's a sensor into your organization that helps you to understand some of the challenges inherent in service. So, by the same token that those former cadets, young lieutenants, had the courage to come forward and say, hey, look, there's a problem, and we recognize it, and we have something to say, and we hope that you listen. That's what we decided to do in our headquarters, and I think it's been a positive change. In addition to that, I had a great opportunity a week ago to participate in a Facebook Live forum with the current commanding general of the 25th Infantry Division in U.S. Army Hawaii, which is 29,000 soldiers, about 16,000 Department of the Army civilians, and 35,000 family members who are here on island, and again, dealing with some of the issues of racism and civil unrest and how to deal with that in a way that I think was substantive, because what we're doing is we're starting the conversations, and we're helping subordinate leaders to understand that it's okay to have the conversations, to sit down with your soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen and talk about race. And oh, by the way, here's a method or technique that you can use to do that. So that's one part of it. Another part of it is your responsibility as a senior leader to the institution. So as the Army and the military and the department are trying to deal with these things, if you've got some sort of idea or a good thought in your head that you need to share with Army senior leadership, in my case, you do that. You don't sit on it. So I had a great opportunity to sit one-on-one with the Chief of Staff of the Army, General McConville, a few months ago, or about a month ago, and just to talk about some of the things that I think that the Army can do immediately to get after some of the issues of institutional racism and bias. And so he was super receptive and said, hey, you're right. Here are some things that I absolutely think we can do right now to get after some of this. So again, there's some professional risk associated with telling people, hey, here's how I see us, and here are some things that I think we can do to really improve our ability to solve this problem institutionally. It's not just, I need to solve the problem in my house, but in our neighborhood writ large. And so to be able to do that, I think it's been powerful, and to be a member of an organization that's open to that kind of feedback, because it's not all good. It's, for instance, the Army decided to take the photo out of the promotion board process to limit institutional bias. And it's based on a study that was done by the Office of Economic Manpower Analysis of West Point, where they determined that there's inherent institutional bias associated with the process because of the photo, and because the board members who are sequestered and can't discuss things with each other, and it's an in-person system, but it's automated. So the board all convenes in one location, basically like jury duty, and you vote the files for promotion or selection for command. So in the process of baselining how board members vote, what they determined is that over the course of 2 years, the board selected with a like me bias. So in other words, white males select white males at a higher rate. Asian females select Asian females at a higher rate. African-American males select African-American males at a higher rate. Do you select other races or genders at a lower rate? No, but you tend to give a bump to, unconsciously, people who look like you. So again, the like me bias. So they pulled the photos out based on that study. And then to be able to say, hey, look, that's one step, but there are other things that we can do in that process to make it even, to decrease the amount of bias and make it more fair, that we're actually selecting and promoting the best people, as opposed to the board members injecting their own inherent biases into the process, or the people who feed through your basically evaluation reports, who feed their own biases into the system. How do you address that? So I gave them 5 recommendations right off the bat that I think that the Army can institute really quickly to get after some of that. And he was super receptive. And I think that we're going to make some positive change on that.
Thanks, Ron. I have a million more questions, but I don't want to monopolize the time. And I want to get Dean Kelley in. I'll let everybody know that she was your mentor for your research project. So letting her ask a question, I don't want to trigger any PTSD, lingering PTSD from your research project. But Dean, you want to pop in? And let me just also say for everybody who's going to be taking a question, we are recording. So if you ask a question, you're kind of consenting that you'll be part of the recording.
Hey, Ron.
Hi, Dean Kelley. It's good to see you.
It is so good to see you.
Proud of you.
I am not as proud as I am of you. And I was just, first of all, I just wanted to acknowledge, Ron, how sorry I am to hear some of the stories of you growing up. And I was thinking about that high school teacher. And I'm reminded of your existence every so often because I get a notice about your promotion. And then I get another notice about your promotion. And I know I've told you this before, but I'm here to be the counter to your high school teacher. And you're going to go all the way to 4 stars in those shoulders. And I know you are. And I just am so proud of what you've accomplished. And
thanks, Dean Kelley.
Being the only African American, the only Black in that group of leaders in itself, you are having an impact, and you are being a role model. And when you did your thesis, you talked about role models. You're being that shining example. But I wanted to ask you, so speaking of promotions and role models, how optimistic you are. Like when you look and you at the pipeline, how optimistic are you? Where's the next 2-star behind you? That is like me. That is like you. That is.
Yeah.
And what things have been put in place that you might feel optimistic? And if not, how optimistic are you that we can see that pipeline of change? So that's my question, Ron.
Okay, Dean Kelley, great question. And again, always great to see you. The prospects for those behind me, it's a bit of a challenge because really it starts with the pipeline starts at the academy, right? Because we can't bring people into the institution at a mid-level
right.
of leadership. So it starts in the beginning. So if you don't foster the relationships and provide the right role models and mentors for cadets, and that's for ROTC that produces 70% of our officers for the Army, for West Point that produces the next 20 to 25, and then for our officer candidate school that makes up the difference. If we don't put in place systems and processes right now to ensure that young men and women who are going to graduate from the military academy in 2024 and then matriculate through the system successfully to be eligible for promotion to 1-star general, where the selection rate for eligible colonels is 2%, to put them in a position where they're even eligible to be selected is a 25-year process. So, how do you keep them alive in the program that long to be able to get from where we're at to where we need to be? And some of that's tied to making sure that we have the right mentors in place, right, so that we start with the right people, and then to continue to mentor. And it can't just be, hey, African-American captain, mentor African-American lieutenant, and then on and so forth. It's got to be everybody. It's got to be cross-race, cross-gender mentorship. So the thing that I try to instill, and one of the recommendations I made to the Chief of Staff of the Army, was that we put in place a combat arms traveling team, if you will. So a general officer, a senior lieutenant colonel, some majors and captains who are on a duty mission to travel around for a couple of weeks to different academic institutions that have ROTC programs. For instance, Duke shares their program with North Carolina Central University, that they would come through and say, hey, look, I exist. You can be like me, when you grow up, if you eat your vegetables and do all the right things. But if those cadets at North Carolina Central don't know that I and people like me exist, then they won't be inspired to join the combat arms where most of our senior leaders are produced, and they won't think that that's a viable path for them when it actually is. So that's really where we have to start, is with those young officers, and we have to continue to pull as we climb in the process of being mentors. And I always share, with anybody who wants to talk about mentorship in the Army, that, you've got to start by drawing a circle around your own boots, right? And if the people that you mentor or the people who mentor you all look like you're missing out on an opportunity. You only know the people you know, right? So to expand your circle to include, women, other ethnic minorities, people who are different than you by branch, people who are different by profession in some cases than you, that can provide the kinds of feedback, understanding, and situational awareness to you about how to go forward in your own career path, then you're really missing an opportunity. So we're getting after some of that systemically by, again, pushing the Army to do some of those things. But again, a lot of it is what you just said. It's being, you got to be present to win, right? So the people who are behind you, you got to continue to pull them too, and you got to make sure they understand, the traps and pitfalls that are out there. One experience I had in the Army as a lieutenant colonel was, at the time, my boss, who was a colonel, explained to me, with my peers present, other commanders, that he did not need to take care of me. The Army would do that because I'm Black. My question to him was, what do you mean? He goes, well, you know what I mean. No, I don't. Because affirmative action is not a program that the Army uses for promotion and selection. It's not. It's all based on merit. And there's no floors, ceilings, goals, what have you, that the Army mandates for the number of left-handed African-American women that are selected, for promotion, because you have to have one. No, you don't. So what you'll find is your groups that are completely bereft of women at certain grades and certain, gender ethnic categories, and men as well, where you find yourself by yourself if you're not careful. So, and in the study that you helped me with, we identified some of that. And, the key is for those singletons out there that are, that are just an expression of excellence out there doing what they need to do, we have to continue to push them forward and inspire them to continue forward. So, the Army has 10 combat divisions. When I was a division commander, I was the only African American. In my last month and a half of command, they selected for command another African American officer who happens to be one of my best friends. So for about 45 days, he and I were able to commiserate in a way that mattered to both of us. Now it only matters to him, but post command for me. But again, it's good to see Xavier Brunson, Johnny Davis, William Thigpen, Kevin Admiral, Milford Beagle, the guys who are behind me, or astride with me, Gary Brito, continue to be successful. And I think the Army is recognizing that, and recognizing the challenges along the way that African Americans, men and women, and really people of color in general, face that some of our majority counterparts just don't.
Thank you, Ron.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you, Dean.
So there's a number of people lining up to ask questions, and our time is short. So I would ask them to ask a quick question. And Ron, if you could maybe have some short answers so we can get as many people participating as possible in the time we have, that would be good. Let's turn to Amy Kramer next, alumnus of our program.
Hello, sir.
Hi, Amy.
My name is Amy. I'm actually currently working at the Pentagon for the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army. And so a lot of these issues are crossing our desks, particularly in the military personnel office. So I have two quick related questions. Of course, getting more minorities into the general officer ranks is a 30-year problem. You can stuff a lot of people into the beginning of the pipeline, but if they're not being promoted, you're going to have Army senior leaders that look very similar to the ones we have today. So you address mentorship as one potential solution, and an important one at that, but I hope you can go into more detail about branch preferencing, something you mentioned earlier. One of the reasons we don't have a lot of minorities going into infantry and armor is because blowing things up isn't really a transferable skill if they're thinking about getting out in maybe 8 years. Certainly not like logistics or intelligence. So how do you get a 21-year-old to think about when they sign that first contract that this is actually a 30-year decision, not just an 8 and I'll reevaluate at that point decision? And the second quick question is, in creating this environment that hopefully is becoming more inclusive and more equitable for people of color, the Confederate base names, which is a unique Army problem, has been in the news lately. And it looks like the Army is going to change those names. And I've read tens of letters on this issue, which is a big part of my job. And I'm wondering, okay, we changed the names, but how do we change the kind of the racism that's in a lot of people's hearts, and kind of create that institutional change that must follow? That the names are kind of just one thing. It's a Band-Aid, really. And so I'm hoping you can kind of address the culture that's inculcated as well. Thank you very much.
Two great questions. In the spirit of what David asked me to do, keep short answers, he forgot I'm a general. There's no such thing as that. So
Professor, we don't abide by that either. So
that's all right. But to your first question about how do we go about solving that 30-year problem, the first thing I'd offer is that when you start talking about transferable skills as a part of the Army's narrative, I think that's fine to a certain extent, but you also have to inform people of how the organization is led. And so the story that I always tell is that it's really about the combat arms branches being best suited to be generalists, because you know a lot about a number of things. And even as a young lieutenant, if you're a combat arms officer, then the other branches work to support you. So it's a supporting relationship. So for instance, as a young infantry lieutenant, you'll have people that provide indirect fire support for you in terms of field artillery and mortars. You'll have people who provide your logistics. You'll have people who conduct all the administrative support for you. And everything is focused on you. You're the tip of the spear. You're the point of, you're the person that has to have actions on the objective that are basically put forth by the efforts of others. So the question is, do you want to be an offensive lineman or a quarterback? It's, that's the analogy, because, or, do you want to be, a first baseman or a catcher? It's the person who has the responsibility to create a synergy and effect at the tip of the spear. So to the argument of, marketable skill, that the skill that people will hire you for based on your military experience is leadership. It's not they're going to teach you whatever it is they need you to be able to do for them at their organization or company. Now, there's some bespoke things in the Army, cyber, intel, that, are again, things that are directly transferable. However, most of the things you do in the military are really tied to leadership. And I'm not saying that you can't be a good leader if you're, a logistician or a sustainer, or, if you're, an administrative person, but you're always going to end up working for a person who's really a combined arms type leader. So again, if you want to limit your opportunity to just something that's, kind of a one skill type situation, then sure, go into, whatever field. But if you want to be the person who's responsible for large organizations and taking them in the right direction, with leadership and character, I would absolutely say that combat arms is where they need to go, and to give them the opportunity to make that choice. Because one of the challenges we have is, going back to the mentorship discussion and role models, is that most of our professors of military science at the historically Black colleges, universities, and most of our large programs, if they're African-American officers, they're not combat arms. So even to know that those opportunities exist for, young Black cadets is a challenge. So we'll get after that. You talked about the naming of Confederate bases. I think that as we start to peel back the why those bases were named that way, and what that means to us now versus what it meant when we named Fort Polk, Fort Bliss, Fort Hood, Fort Bragg, I think it makes a lot of sense. But you're asking, how do we change people's hearts? and changing the names are just a Band-Aid. I think it's a huge step forward to change the way that people understand and communicate with one another in a way that helps us to again, be better at all this. So I think it starts with listening, because you can't change hearts until you change minds. You have to make the proper argument, because what you'll see on a lot of boards and forums, and you'll see it on a lot of comments, is that, this is about readiness. This can't be, when you're in a foxhole, nobody cares what color you are or whether you're a man or a woman. Well, the answer is maybe. And are we better because we understand each other a little better? Are we going to fight harder for one another because we've built a relationship based on trust, because I understand where you come from? I know what you're about, and I want to be in this with you. So again, it comes down to having the difficult conversations, and really for us to listen to one another, and to move to a place really in our minds and in our hearts that helps us to better understand. I think that's where the readiness is in our ability to be more trusting of one another, because the relationships built on trust are what matters. And in the foxhole, it's that I trust you with my life is what matters. So again, that's how I'd address your question. And really, I appreciate your time and chiming in, and all the hard work that you and the other Department of the Army civilians are putting in inside the building.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Ron. Let's turn to Phil Ma, current undergrad on the AGS Council.
Hello, Major General. Thank you so much for your time today. I was just wondering whether you mentioned previously about the like me bias, and I was wondering whether the lack of diversity in military leadership affected the ways and the decisions the leaders make for the military, and how those decisions impact unrepresented groups of the military disproportionately.
Well, Phil, thanks for your question. And again, I think it comes down to, the people who are required to lead our military. Again, it's a function of, those people having the opportunity to continue to rise in our formation to a level where they end up leading the institution. And so for them to have the opportunity to see themselves, in that, not just to see themselves in terms of their physical appearance, but to really see their biases and help them better understand the problems of the formation. It's really about being open to listen to some of the challenges and issues that are going on inside of the force. So I just share with you, I had my team print this picture. It's from a tweet that the Secretary of Defense put out in October. And if you look at it, it's all of the service chiefs. It's the Secretary of Defense, the President of the United States that are around the Resolute desk and in the Oval Office. And it's all the service chiefs and combatant commanders, and it's all males. And so how are you working the perspective of, female soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines into the major decisions that are being made, in our services? And so the answer is, or minorities. So, because again, there are two ethnic minorities in that group. General Steve Townsend of AFRICOM, who's of U.S. Afghani descent, and General Nakasone, who's the commander of Cybercom. So how are you getting those perspectives in? Again, you only have your own lived experience to dwell upon and to draw upon when you make decisions, and you're really missing out. So to have at that next lower layer of leadership, people who can influence and speak truth to power, much like, those cadets from the classes of 18 and 19 that are now lieutenants from West Point, and other leaders who are a couple levels below them, like me. You have to be willing to make sure they understand those perspectives, and they have to be willing to and open to listen and learn. So to the Secretary of Defense's point, when he came out really with a letter to the entire department to say, hey, look, we need to get after this, and we need to better understand what the challenges are out there so we can be better at the business of, protecting our nation and our way of life. And the only way we're going to do that is by having a good understanding of how we're making decisions and what that has to do with our ability to understand one another a little better in terms of race. So that the Secretary is having listening sessions with the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, with his senior enlisted advisor, the SEAC, with the combatant commanders, and on down. So, like I said, our organization is listening. My boss, Admiral Phil Davidson, is next week sitting down in his office for an hour and a half, 2 hours, with the door open for anybody who wants to come in and talk to him about issues of racial, gender, or just problems inside the headquarters that they're experiencing. So again, it's about being willing to listen and to be able to see your organization for what it is and make the positive change you need to be able to get after your missions. I hope that answers your question, Phil.
So Ron, here's something that maybe a question that kind of thing that maybe one of these open listening sessions would produce. And it's from Vivian Taylor, who, if I'm not mistaken, just graduated from our MPP program last year. She said, "Hi, I'm an Army veteran of the Iraq War. I'm also trans. Given the complexity around lifting the military trans ban and the ban partially being dropped back into place, it feels like there a lot of uncertainty about trans people's place in the military. At the same time, according to some research, U.S. military is the single largest employer and source of medical insurance for our trans people in our nation. Can you speak to how the military leadership is navigating the complexities for trans people in the military and how military leadership is supporting all those trans service members that are currently serving?"
Well, I could speak to my own experience. It's a great question. Again, it's about treating people with dignity and respect. It's about understanding, really the medical challenges associated at some points with folks in the trans community, and really being able to support them holistically throughout this process. So, in terms of the politics of it, it is what it is. But in terms of what happens inside of units, it's really about everyone being open to giving way together and treating everyone with dignity and respect, so that if the challenges that are associated with being a transgender member of our armed forces are known to the chain of command, they can take appropriate actions to provide the support that's necessary holistically for that soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine to serve our country with dignity.
Okay, our next question comes from another person that was a big part of your experience at Duke, Ron, Jenny Aiken, who we're also very proud of. She's been doing a tremendous amount of work for Blue Ribbon families in her current position, and has been helping a lot of nonprofits and others with all the skills she learned down the road at UNC, and then working for our program for so many years. So Jenny, it's great to see you, and you're welcome to ask the question.
Yeah, hi Ron. It's so good to see you, sir. Been a while. Funny how
Jenny, good to see you again as well. Good morning.
Good morning. So here at Blue Star Families, I'm now the co-director of applied research here, and we are really going back through a lot of our former research and trying to isolate, pull out Black military families respondents and better understand their experience. My question to you is, as we go through that process, as we really try to increase our sample size of Black military voices, what questions should we be asking our military family members? We know there's a lot being done for service members, and I have thoughts on that, but I'd love to hear you talk about military families themselves.
Well, Jenny, that's a great question, and thanks for what you and Blue Star Families are doing, really for all of us in a way that that in a lot of cases we can't do ourselves. So again, thank you for your service, and thank you for what you mean to all of our families. Again, I think that I don't know that the specific experience that African American families are having is that different from any family. But again, to ask the questions, what can we do for you? What specific instances and situations of discrimination have you experienced, and how can we best get after some of the challenges that you're going to have? And I'm telling you now, they're having challenges. There are instances of bias and racism that occur on a daily basis to families in the military that I can personally speak to. Here, I'm kind of smirking, but here's a situation I deal with quite often. even as a general officer, because, your military spouse, there are parking spaces at certain facilities that are identified for colonels and above, in some cases for general officers and above. So the number of times that someone has chosen to ask me if I understand that I'm parking in a general officer's parking space, do you know? And my response is generally the same. My mother was a reading teacher. My ability to be able to discern the letters on that sign is pretty good. I'm Major General Clark. Who are you? And normally the answer comes back, I am embarrassed, I'm ashamed, I am whatever. I go, no, you're racist. You're biased, you're racist. You made some assumption that for whatever reason, despite, me wearing, proper trousers, a collared shirt, a belt, and leather shoes, and driving an Audi Q5, that I don't belong here. That you don't belong here, but you're going to also make sure that I know that I don't belong here. Because it's not another general or flag officer, spouse, or retiree, or currently serving service member that's having the discussion with me. It's someone who believes that for whatever reason I'm taking advantage of an opportunity that I did not earn. So again, have the discussions with the families you're in contact with, because I'm sure their experiences would be very different than mine. But again, it's things that they're dealing with every day that I'm absolutely certain that your organization can get after in a way that us in military, or even some of our Department of the Army civilians cannot. Thank you, ma'am.
And I think we have time for one more question, and you won't be surprised if Professor Nichols would like to have a word with you.
It's just a family reunion.
It's Blue Devils night.
Ron, it's so good to see you. I'm so happy that you could take some time to come and talk to us. And I hope Simone and the kids are well and that you're surviving out there in Hawaii. You got one of my good friends, Josh Rudd, and Jamie Gerard out there, I think, right?
That's right. They're both doing great.
I'm so happy to hear that. So I want to just go back to something that you said about growing up in Louisiana. And I would like you just to put a pin on what specifically your father did with you it almost sounds like he inoculated you to be able to burn through prejudice. And I'm very interested in that piece. You were in Louisiana, you faced racism, but for whatever reason, you identify it and you can to maneuver through it or around it. How did your dad do that? And could you just put a really fine pin on that, if you would?
Thanks, Tim. Great question. My dad's he passed away 4 years ago. He was the best teacher, coach, mentor I ever had. I mean, he coached sports teams I played on. He was just a fantastic role model. Part of it was just the way that he lived his life, and the examples that he would set in terms of his own patriotism, and really kind of help us understand that you're American, and this is what this means. But because you're African American, to some people it means a different thing. So my dad was a bumper sticker guy. So literally would have bumper stickers all over his vehicles. Army strong, Army of one, local support your local law enforcement, back the badge, all those kinds of things, because he knew that driving his vehicle in the South, that he was going to be the subject of potentially somebody pulling him over. So what he wanted the law enforcement person to understand is that, one, I'm a patriot, and two, I support you and your ability to protect and serve me and my family. So that's one thing. The other thing he did was he prepared me for the eventualities of what would happen as a Black man in the United States. So here's a great example. When I learned to drive, he also taught me that, hey, driving is hazardous to your health, not just in the business of, you being a fatality in some sort of traffic accident. So, wear your seatbelt. And this is before seatbelts were mandatory. But he said, what you also must do is you must put your driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance above the visor in your car. Because you, demographically, can pose a threat to some unsuspecting, or biased member of law enforcement. So in other words, when they ask you for your driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance, which you know they will ask you for in a traffic stop, if you reach for your wallet, it can be perceived as reaching, for a weapon or something that would threaten a police officer. If you reach into your glove compartment or glove box, again, that's a place that could conceal some sort of something that's harmful to the police officer. But if your hands are on the steering wheel when you get stopped and the police officer says driver's license, registration, proof of insurance, and your hands go up, it's obvious to him that you are not a threat and your hands are going to where your driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance would be. So my question to him, you're a kid, so much like David's daughter asking, hey, what's the government got to do with this? My question was, why would I put my driver's license there? I might need it for something else. He goes, what's it called? It's called a driver's license. You need it to drive. That's what it's for. Drive with it. If you need a photo ID, you have one of those. It's called a military dependent ID. Driver's license stays in your car above your visor. That's the same lesson I taught to my son, who, for whatever reason, may find himself in that situation. So some of it was just watching his personal example and how he went about things to limit potential risk to himself and his family, but also just straight up lessons that he taught. So rather than being a bumper sticker guy, because I'm not, I would always travel with my military service cap in the back of my car. So anybody walking up to it can see that I'm a member of the armed services currently serving. It's not, I'm not in a situation where I'm a threat to you. I'm a patriot, much like you should be.
So if I could just follow up, so those seem like fantastic tactics, like things to kind of to anticipate problems, and you being a grunt, all about tactics and the importance of it. But there's also a mindset. Right now, our nation is so worked up about issues of race that people lose it against each other, against their neighbors, against people in a parking lot, to the point of violence or name calling or threatening. So the tactics are one piece, but there's also a mindset. There's also a mindset about not losing it and keeping your cool. And I think you mentioned that with the parking lot and the reserved parking and stuff, but like, did your dad find himself in situations where people were probing him or people were denigrating him, and he handled it, even though he used all of his tactics, it was still happening? And how did he get through that?
Yeah, great question. He's a person who always used examples of others in terms of trying to help us understand the context in which we're doing things. So there's always a historical context to things. So, he would talk about the preachings of Dr. King. And, I read, letter from my Birmingham jail when I was, middle school. He talked about Muhammad Ali was another great example of someone that he used frequently to kind of help us understand context. Jackie Robinson, another person who was, again, this is bigger than you. For you to take some, tactical step or tactical misstep will not allow us to get to the strategic goal, which is, your success and excellence in your life. And so it was always, you're playing the long game. And here are examples of people who played it well. And you have to know that, despite some of the, pitfalls and denigration that my father, had in his own life, because again, he's, Vietnam vet. So, coming back from Vietnam during a time where our nation didn't celebrate its veterans, where he had to take his uniform off when he arrived in San Francisco on his way back home to Louisiana from Vietnam because of fear of someone lashing out at him. So he kind of understood, that, being Black in America in the 1960s and 70s meant that, hey, you need to keep your powder dry, because in the long term, we need you to be able to get to whatever the point of success is in your life that you need to achieve. And so, back to the story about high school, I was ready for that teacher, Mr. Hunter, to come at me when I was 14 years old. And it was because my parents had prepared me for that moment. And so I ended up having a relationship with that teacher that spanned the rest of his life, well into my military service. I mean, I was a major when he died. But every time I came back to Leesville, I would visit him.
That's pretty impressive.
Every time, because I wanted him to understand, not just, hey, look, you were, formative in my life, in terms of your, your inability to be able to see me when I was standing in front of you, for who I am and what I might represent. But I want you to understand that what I represent is something that you should not take for granted. And I'm not just a, example of Black excellence. I'm just a person that, you tried to limit my success at a time when it could have been devastating to me as a kid. But, hey, here I am. I will continue to be successful, and I have you to thank for it in small measure. But again, it's something that my parents prepared me for in word and deed, and it wasn't just tactics. Some of it was playing the long game. It's strategic. Where you're at is not where you're going, and our expectation for you is that you're going to be successful in life. I mean, my parents saved money for me to go to college from before I was born.
Yeah.
Because they were playing the long game.
They sure were.
And I went to West Point, so they got to keep the money, which is even better. So I just share that with you.
Well, Ron, you've been incredibly generous of your time. I want to close up, say a couple things. First of all, I just want to let you know that it was our students who said that they wanted the first events of this year to focus on these issues and how they overlap with our American Grand Strategy programs, focus on national security and foreign policy, and so on. And when I heard that, I knew that the first person that we should invite was you, because I knew you had the passion and you had the life experiences. Just what we try to do in American Grand Strategy is bring people who have had these life experiences for the students to learn and model themselves after. And I don't think I could have hoped for a better session to kick this off. The other thing the students are doing for our organization is understanding and knowing that we have to do better ourselves. We don't have enough minority representation among the students who either come to our events or are part of our leadership, and we've recognized that, and we're taking proactive steps to change that. And the students have been thinking about and working all summer to do that. It's not so easy. It's a tough road. We don't expect immediate results, but the effort is being put in, and I'm proud of the work that they've done. And we have other events. We can't announce our full schedule yet, but we're going to be revisiting these themes over the course of the year. And so you have really set the groundwork for a really productive year for us and set the tone, and really, all of us are so greatly appreciative. Now, we have an extremely small token of appreciation, but I want to echo something Judith said, which is she's rooting for the fourth star, but I can remember at least 3, if not 4, chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff who have gotten this American Grand Strategy t-shirt, which you will soon receive in the mail. It's going to make it all the way to Hawaii, but you're going to have one. And so we'd love it for you to add to the ranks of chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff that wear the Duke University American Grand Strategy t-shirt to the gym. So with that, we want you to have a great day, starting your day in Hawaii. And we are incredibly grateful for your time.
Well, David, thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to remain connected to Duke University and to the Sanford School and to the American Grand Strategy Program, and allow me to be a part of the, as we say in Hawaii, the ohana for today. So again, thanks, and best of luck to you and your students in the coming year. Well done by continuing to keep it fresh through numerous means, though we can't all get together as a part of some of the social distancing with regard to the pandemic. So thanks for continuing the discussion.